listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the new push to crack down on dangerous e-bikes. Why one independent MP is pushing for tougher national laws to keep pedestrians and riders safe. All those details in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Thursday, the 4th of December. A warning, the details in this story are distressing. Victoria Police have announced they have laid 83 new charges against alleged Melbourne childcare pedophile Joshua Dale Brown. Detectives say the latest charges involve 4 additional alleged victims, as well as further offences linked to earlier victims. The 27-year-old is now facing a total of 156 charges. Among the new charges faced by Brown include 6 counts of penetrating a child, producing child abuse material, and using a carriage service to transmit child abuse material. Brown, who worked at 20 childcare centres between 2017 and 2025, will face court in February. The Victorian government will cut 1,000 public sector jobs, including hundreds of executive roles, after a major review slammed the state's public service, saying it had become bloated and confusing. 29 of 500 public entities and boards will be abolished, far fewer than the sweeping changes recommended by former top bureaucrat Helen Silver, who led the review. Here is Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen.
Some really forensic work that's been undertaken, looking at how do we ensure that we have a public service that's focused on the future, which is why there have been a number of entities that are being proposed to be either merged together or are having their functions brought back into the operations of the departments that they report to.
The government claims the changes will save more than $4 billion over 4 years without cutting frontline workers, but the opposition says the measures will do little to tackle Victoria's soaring debt. And Google has revealed the most searched terms in Australia for 2025. Topping the list was Cyclone Alfred, with users scrambling for updates. American activist Charlie Kirk came in second after his fatal shooting, followed by the 2025 Australian federal election. Sports, disasters and global conflict also dominated, including a few interesting searches like, quote, how to make ice cream grow in a garden. Now it's time to get into our deep dive with the federal member for Mackellar, Dr. Sophie Scamps, on her e-bike safety private members bill. On the back of skyrocketing sales of e-bikes and an increase in rider and pedestrian injuries, Dr. Scamps is calling for tougher nationwide regulations, saying Australia is concerningly behind the rest of the world when it comes to bike safety. Sophie, thanks so much for joining us. We've seen e-bike safety back in the headlines again after another fatal accident in New South Wales this week. How serious is this problem with e-bikes at the moment?
Oh, it's incredibly serious. And I think what we've seen is the technology race ahead of regulation. So we have really unsafe practices and bikes being ridden on our roads and our footpaths. And what we're seeing is increasing severe accidents and tragedies. And my main concern is to prevent more tragedies happening around the country, particularly with Christmas coming up and the summer holidays coming up. We want to keep our kids safe. We want to keep pedestrians safe as well.
I heard somebody say this week that some of these e-bikes, because they can go incredibly quickly, it's like allowing young children, sometimes as young as 8, to actually ride the equivalent of very fast motorbikes and often without a helmet.
Well, 100%. So what you've got are bikes that don't need to be pedaled, only need to use the throttle, have motors that are up to 500 kilowatts that can go 50, 60, 70 kilometres an hour, and they're being ridden on footpaths and by people who are not licensed and often don't have the road sense that takes many years to develop. So it is incredibly dangerous, not only for the riders, but for pedestrians. And I have so many people that are so worried about walking on the footpaths, parents worried about taking their toddlers on footpaths, so many near-miss stories. And what I really want to prevent are further tragedies.
Sophie, you make a great point there. It's not just the riders of these e-bikes that are suffering serious injuries, sometimes fatal injuries, but also pedestrians along local streets.
Exactly. We had a pedestrian hit and killed just a month or two ago, which is devastating. So it's about protecting pedestrians, it's about protecting riders, and it's about protecting drivers as well. Here on the northern beaches of Sydney, I think we're e-bike central, and so many drivers say they've had near misses, and the last thing any of us wants is to hit a child or somebody riding an e-bike. And so it's time that the laws and the regulations caught up with what is the reality so that we keep, e-bikes are fantastic. They're a fantastic way to get around as long as we make it safe and as long as, we don't have children who are in fact not riding an e-bike but riding motorbikes around the place. We need to make sure that the bikes that we're using do meet minimum safety and quality standards. And that's what I've been fighting for.
Sophie, we know bikes are a great way of getting around. They're a great environmental option for many. What is the key difference between bikes? In the 1970s and 80s and 90s, many of us rode push bikes without helmets. What is the difference and why are we seeing such a big increase in these injuries with e-bikes? Latest stats show in New South Wales alone that ambulance officers treated more than 770 patients for e-bike related injuries just since the start of this year.
Well, the e-bikes have taken off. They're really, really popular, and they're popular as well. Like, they are actually great because we live often in a hilly environment. I know where I am on the northern beaches. It's really hilly. So riding a push bike is often really difficult. So having a motor-assisted bike is fantastic. But the issue is that they're unregulated. So what is legal in New South Wales, say, is when you have to pedal for the e-motor to assist you. It should cut out when you're going 25 kilometres an hour. The motor should cut out. You should have to pedal to actually get the motor to assist you. And the bike should not be able to be tampered with so that it can be easily switched over to be ridden like a motorbike. What we're seeing is it's very easy to switch many of these bikes over. The motors are far more powerful than what's legal. And so you have kids on bikes that can be ridden only with the throttle and go 50, 60 kilometres an hour. And these kids obviously don't have their licence. The vehicles are unregistered. They're uninsured. So we're getting more and more accidents. We've had collisions. We've had pedestrians being hit. And I think the other thing is that when there is an accident, it's often incredibly severe or tragic. So I think a lot of those presentations to hospitals and emergency departments are for really severe injuries like neck injuries, spinal injuries, head injuries, and fractures. And then, of course, the very, very tragic deaths that we're seeing as well. And the last thing I want is for there to be more deaths on our roads because of bikes and because people are just trying to get from A to B and, have independence how they travel. It's up to us to make it safe. And I don't think as legislators, either the state or federal governments have done that very well at all. We've been left way behind.
Sophie, you've introduced what was called a Safer E-Bikes bill earlier this year, and you're calling for well overdue reform to ensure that all e-bikes are safe and fit for purpose and regulated under federal law, because the issue is there's a major loophole because of imported e-bikes.
Exactly. Well, there's a couple of things. In my private members bill, I was calling for there's no import standard currently. So it was removed from the Road Vehicle Safety Standard Act, which is basically the standard for vehicles being imported. It was removed entirely from that in 2019. So what I'm asking for is for e-bikes to come back in under our Road Vehicle Safety Act, so that there is a minimum safety standard. The EU has best practice, and actually that's what I called for in my private members bill. And the federal minister, Minister King, has just announced a couple of days ago that they are actually going to enact that. So there will be minimum standards for what is an e-bike. And if a bike doesn't meet those standards, then it can't be classified as an e-bike, and it will be instead classified as a road vehicle. It'll have to be registered, it'll have to be insured, and you'll have to have a license to ride riders. So again, the minimum safety standards were things like making sure that the electric motor cuts out when the bike hits 25 kilometres an hour, that the motor isn't greater than 250 kilowatts, that you do have to pedal for the motor to assist, and that it can't be tampered with easily to switch it across so it can be ridden like a motorbike.
We saw some action from the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns earlier this week after a fatal e-bike accident. In regards to the importance of national standards, we've seen a failure in the system regarding childcare reform, even aged care reform. How important is it, Sophie, that we have national standards and legislation?
It's so important. We need nationally consistent standards because, as you said, there's all sorts of different standards across the range on many different issues. And we see that as well with e-bikes. So different standards in different states. And New South Wales was really an outlier, allowing the motor of an e-bike to be 500 kilowatts, which is twice the amount that's allowed in any of the other states. So it's good to see Chris Minns bring that back into line. But you do need nationally consistent standards because people do move their bikes around the state as well. You want to make sure your bike is legal wherever you ride it. But the other thing is it's very confusing for riders and parents and everyone to know what is legal and what isn't legal. So there needs to be an awareness campaign, an education campaign around what is legal to ride in Australia. What is an e-bike? What is a motorbike? What can you ride on a footpath? How fast can you go? All those types of things. What needs to be registered? What do you need a license for? There's a huge amount of confusion around that at the moment. And as a result, we see a lot of bikes that aren't legal to be being ridden and unsafely. So it's about we need to bring in the standards and then create the awareness around what is safe and what is legal as well. So we need all levels of government working together along with the police, the local police as well.
How urgent are these reforms, Sophie, do you believe?
Oh, they're well overdue. We are way behind. And so what I'm calling for is to make sure that these things are enacted before Christmas. We've got the summer holidays coming up. We know that kids especially will be out and about. They'll want to get places. They'll be on their e-bikes. So that's why I've been working really hard on this for the last few months because we need to keep our children safe. The last thing I want to see is another death of another child or a young person or a pedestrian. We are well overdue and we need to really catch up on this as quickly as possible. And we need that awareness, that education program about what is safe and what is legal as well. And I should say by 2030, the transport sector will be the highest carbon emitting sector of all. So we really do need to catch up and be doing what we can to reduce transport emissions as well.
Thanks so much for joining us, Sophie. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Natarsha.
That was the federal member for Mackellar, Dr. Sophie Scamps. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back tonight with an episode of The Beefing on James versus Rupert Murdoch. And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.